And hey,
Hey.
fantastic. Yes. You were saying that the phone video was not going to be that good, but like it's looking really good.
Yeah, I worked on my lighting in my
Awesome. Could you start off by just introducing yourself and telling folks a little bit about yourself?
yeah, so my name is Yuki Jackson. I am half black and half Japanese. And I am a poet. Some of my work has been in some, like lit mags and whatnot, some, local publications. And I also founded a youth program in the Sulphur Springs neighborhood of Tampa called the Battleground. And so that program is basically where we have martial arts sessions as well as poetry / hip hop lyricism sessions. So basically, just the goal is to empower the youth there, to build some skills with their, internal, external battling tendencies. So that's what that's there for. And then, and so mostly I'm, working on writing, and I've also taught at some local schools like Ringling College of Art and Design, as well as like Hillsborough Community College and, other places too. So.
Awesome. Also, I did not know that. I feel like you had mentioned this before, but I did not know about the martial arts component with Battlegrounds. So.
Yeah. That's taught by a martial arts instructor. His name is Garrett Brumfield, and he runs a local martial arts studio called Tampa Wing Chun Kung Fu.
Oh shoot! Okay.
Yeah, so he does Wing Chun, and he's amazing. He's incredible. He's incredible, and he's generously had been from the beginning. He was like, just like willing to do it, just out of, his goodness. So he's incredible. So yeah, and he was a public school teacher for 17 years before he decided to, stop teaching and get into, teaching martial arts. He also teaches chess. So anyway, yeah, he's a great instructor.
I feel like just in you sharing about Battleground, the Battleground Youth Program, how like already it's like I was like, oh wait, like this is very much inherent, and we'll get into this in the rest of this conversation, but it's very much inherent, like this sort of like intersectional cross-cultural exchange component where it's like
yes.
So I'm like super excited to talk more about that, but just to kind of start off, because you are both a creator or a creative, but then at the same time you're an educator and you're doing all this work in the community, amplifying your voice and sharing your insights, but then also amplifying other people's voices. What got you started on this journey with poetry and writing, and and then using that and getting it into education as well?
Yeah, so for me, I've always been attracted to writing, and I think now I'm realizing more and more, actually I feel like most people just end up writing poetry at some point in their life to express themselves. So it's very that, like, so when I was like younger, in my childhood, and especially in my teens, I just started writing poetry because I was going through a depression, or there's things that I was angry about or things that didn't make sense to me. So I just naturally started writing poetry, and so it started more in my teens, just something I would put in my journal to like vent, express myself. And then, I would also like reading some poetry, like Langston Hughes, or like I think one of the first poets I really gravitated towards was Nikki Giovanni.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then actually I was either in my late teens or early 20s. I went to see her speak. She came to I was living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time, and she did like a speaking engagement to promote a book. And I just remember she didn't even so much talk about poetry a lot, but she talked about space exploration. And because she had written about it in one of her essays, right? And so I just like her talk really stuck with me. And then it connects to poetry and my mentality of poetry in the sense of like, it seems like it's ultimately like this exploration to find out things that we don't fully understand.
Mm.
you know and so that's, for me, poetry has just been that. So yeah, it was just more of a hobby. And then during my 20s, I just I call it my, like, my exploring period, where I just kind of worked a bunch of odd jobs. I worked, like, I was like a janitor, I worked at a gas station, I worked at call centers, I worked as a receptionist, I worked at, just like, you name it. I feel like I've worked that kind of job. And so I wasn't really, I had quit college, and I was just kind of, experiencing life and going through relationships and accumulating pain and experiences and struggles, and then eventually, it was actually not until I was around, I don't even know, I guess my maybe 30 or so. Actually, it was, so basically it was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. One day I was going to do a panel talk together as a representative with like a Buddhist organization that I'm a part of. And it was an interfaith dialogue. And I was one of the panelists, and they said, so, please introduce yourself. And at that point, I had not written poetry in years, right? But how I introduced myself, immediately what came out of me was, I was like, well, I'm a poet. And I was like, oh, I don't even know why I said that. And so I was like, okay, now that I said that I'm a poet, I guess I better like do something about that and get back into it. So then I ended up applying to go to grad school for poetry, and just like getting back into it. And then immediately I went through like a really painful breakup. So it was just kind of, and then that's also right when I got hired to work at the library in Sulphur Springs. And, so it was like, so basically, like, all these things kind of seem random. Because even my undergraduate degree is actually in criminology. Because I was like, oh, I want to teach art in prisons and stuff like that. But so it basically all just sort of culminated into like, yeah, like, I'm supposed to use poetry as a vehicle to now express my perspective, my experiences, try to make sense of things, and also, to use that to help to, empower other people. And that doesn't have to just happen behind cell block doors, because I realized, like, wow, actually a lot of the world is set up like a prison. And you have to be in prison to be in prison, right? So, like, yeah, I can do this work outside of I mean, I'm not opposed to ever, like, going in, you know what I mean, if I have the opportunity. But yeah, I just realized it's not limited. So yeah, so that's kind of my kind of meandering zigzag path into getting into poetry.
I really like how it reconnects with how you started the story of like, oh, like, Langston Hughes, and then like going to see Nikki Giovanni speak, and then like talking about space exploration,
Yeah.
and then all coming back to this theme of self-discovery,
Yeah.
and then like discovery and making sense of the world that we live in, making sense of how we can navigate the world that we live in, when, just as you said, there's like, we don't have to be, there's that prison of how we structure our society, which is really connects a lot with some other conversations that we've had on creating space around like abolition, and restructuring and rethinking the systems that we have. So it's so exciting. Okay, so one of the ways that you're doing that is with the Battleground Youth Program at Sulphur Springs. So what, I know you've already kind of given like an overview of this and touched on this, of how like you've you had so many different kinds of jobs and so many different experiences and so much like in pain, like experiencing pain as well. Um, but specifically thinking to sort of like your identities, because I think you made reference to um, your Buddhist organization, so like faith identity, um, you know, being black and Japanese, and so like ethnicity, race, like there's so many different identities
Yeah.
and minority identities that you occupy. How have those identities and your experiences influenced sort of that pathway and that journey and sort of where you are today?
Yeah, it's interesting. So for me, in growing, so it stems from is in my childhood. So I was born and raised in Japan in my childhood, and so my mother's side of the family is Japanese, and my father's side is Black, American, and it was interesting. So in so even with my family, my grandparents basically had told my mother, like, if you ever marry a black man, because they knew she was like into dating black men. I think that, but they were like, if you actually marry one, if you take that step, then your child will never be welcome in our home.
Ooh.
you know
Mm.
yeah, and so I knew that from as a child. I grew up
Mm.
with that knowledge, right, that like I'm not welcome in my grandparents' home. And what's crazy, and ironic, is I have a cousin who we're 2 months apart. We were born 2 months apart, and she's it's a female, and so but she grew up very close with them. So it's like we're almost like parallel, but have this very different experience, right, with our relationship with them. And so there was that, that kind of that racism, right, that came from my own family, my grandparents, and then as well as there were several experiences I had even just out in public in Japan, with Japanese people who were scared of me, because I was darker, or even there were times where I was called like monkey. I remember being called monkey many times, or like gorilla, just this kind of very like savage, that kind of view, right, of a black person. And so I just remember, and I've always been very like sensitive and like internalized everything. And so but I remember when I would talk to my mom, about these experiences, like instead of sort of consoling me in a sense of like, like she basically was trying to combat me developing this identity as like a victim, or that I'm less than. And so she would share stories or parables to like really empower me, and she would encourage me to write about these experiences, and share these experiences, whether it was at our Buddhist meetings, or whether it was through storytelling. So it's like she basically taught me from my childhood to create value, from this adversity. And she said, actually, she instilled in me, this is actually to your advantage that you're going through this, because you're going to be able to understand the pain of other people who are also mistreated or treated unfairly, or looked down on. And so I would say that's where I just really kind of, my first sense of identity, in that understanding how on a for some people, or for some sections of society, what I am could be looked at as less than. But then I turned to art and writing specifically as a way to not only make sense of it, but then to also like connect to other people who may be going through that. So so I would say really it came within those experiences in my childhood, first with encountering racism.
When was it that you moved to the States?
Well, we moved back and forth a few times. Hey, Sandra. We moved back and forth a few times. We lived in Washington State a couple years. This was like when I was around like between like 5 and 7 or so. And then we moved back to Japan, and then we moved back to the States. So we went like back and forth. But we basically moved to the United States for good when I was about 12.
When you're about to,
So it was in middle school.
Ooh, wow. So in a sense, like you kind of had, I can imagine how that would be like that experience of seeing at different points in your early childhood of the discrimination in Japan, and those experiences, and then also then translating and like thinking about how does it relate to the States and like this experience here. And I think like this is the thing that, a lot of folks have this very idealized image of Japan in a lot of ways. Like there's almost like this a certain amount of model minority kind of labeling that happens in terms of, racial hierarchy and ethnic hierarchy in terms of Asians as well. In thinking about sort of being in spaces where you are not part of that majority identity, there's the explicit, forms of absolute dehumanization, but then there's also just not being welcome or not feeling like, even if it wasn't explicit, the sense of not having space. For you, like, what has been your experience trying to carve out space for yourself throughout sort of that back and forth journey, growing up, and then also then once you move to the States, like what has that been like to carve out space for yourself in majority spaces?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel this is the thing about experience too, right? Because parts of it, or actually a lot of it, it's like even it ties into the Soto versus, the outside versus inside. It's like a lot of it was the internal work, right? That had to happen within myself of actually what I've kind of recently kind of making strides in and like really accepting myself, really embracing myself, really coming to grips with a lot of experiences that I've been through or aspects of myself that I, deemed as, not valuable, and based on whether it was like internally induced or, a lot of it is like externally induced, right? From like what society or, how you're treated. So yeah, a lot of it has been more of like an internal journey to really embrace myself. And then I'm noticing that as I increase my sense of self-worth, then when I enter a space, it's also a different reaction, but specifically it's also interesting because so especially with being mixed, right? So I'm also very conscious, I'm conscious of both sides, and then but I would say more than anything, when I'm in a majority white space, I'm more aware of my Blackness. Mm-hmm. And so I'll, give an example, even like, for example, so I've done some, some teaching, in like college, level. And I remember even going into work at one, for orientation. And, I think they had hired maybe, 30 to 40 new, professors or instructors. And I was, so immediately I was like, and I was the only Black person, right? I also happened to be the only Asian, and, but it's like, but I was just very aware of that. And so, fortunately, I also kind of focus on wherever I am, I focus on creating genuine connections with people, just by kind of me being myself, for better or for worse, but so physically in that particular space, there was a woman there, who had just gotten hired as well. And she was super sweet. She was a white woman, very sweet, very, so she was one individual in that setting, but she helped me feel so welcome, to where I felt comfortable. But then there was kind of the wider, kind of, right, like systemic kind of barriers that I felt and saw. And so for me, when I realized that, my particular department, there was no other Black professor. And then the school, the entire college, I think there was maybe like one or two other Black professors who I had never met, so just, even from the beginning there, I just determined that, I was hired to be a teacher, to be an educator. So I just have to do my best. I want to do a really good job. But, that can also be burdensome, right? When we feel like, oh, we're carrying like the torch for our entire, for the race, and we are the sole representation, of that race. So yeah, that's definitely, it felt very heavy, honestly. But then I was able to kind of free myself when I realized, like, okay, I'm also here for a reason. I happen to be here. So instead of me trying to be like this model Black teacher at this majority white institution, let me be myself, let me be myself, and let me be able to impart the kind of experience and interaction and love, for my students in a way that, they're going to take with them, and I just knew that automatically by having that kind of a positive interaction with me, they're naturally then that in itself is going to create hopefully an opportunity, for somebody, who's not white,
Mm-hmm.
in the future. So yeah, I mean, I would say for, just generally it's been to be myself unapologetically and like do my best, and but also to like speak up whenever necessary too, even though that can get tricky a lot of times, I know. And we, a lot of times I feel like, especially more recently, many people talk about like the fatigue of like being a Black person who's constantly feel like we're always the one who has to like teach and share, but that's also just kind of a part of being a human, right, on this earth. Like we have to have dialogue, we have to communicate with each other, we kind of pick and choose where we have to speak up. So I had one particular experience there where I, had to speak up to a coworker who she, I guess, had, in her own words, she had good intention, but she was basically like, send out like a email and then there's like a chain email and everybody's responding to that email with their own, with their own thoughts and input. And you're like, and then at some point, so the email chain had gotten so long. So I was like, okay, I'm just not even going to read anybody's email. I'm going to just assume it's all good stuff and, whatever. But one day when I logged in my email inbox, like my inner voice, and this, to me, it was a lesson of always like following your intuition, because my intuition was like, this one particular response to this email chain, you need to check it out. So I did, and I clicked on the link, and it happened to be a coworker, a link to her website or whatever. She's an artist, like a visual artist. And she had a piece of, so I'm like scrolling through her page, like, okay, cool. And then I was like, wait a minute. So there was this image of this artwork she made. The title of it was Black Madonna. And then, but the art piece itself, it looked, my gut reaction to it was like, it resembled Sambo art, or, the kind of art where, it's like the big red lips and the little eyes and stuff. And in this particular piece, it also had a clown nose, like a red clown. And then the hair was depicted as like little wires, like a few wires sticking up with like beads on the end. It was just like, and it was
There's
a white,
lot happening there.
There was a lot happening, yeah. So there was, but it was a white woman, it was the artist. So it bothered me. And so initially I was like, well, I just got hired. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to teach. I'm just trying to do a good
Mm.
job. And I have to represent Black. You know what I mean? It's like, so I was weighing with all that. And now I got to call out this like coworker who's like has some artwork that's not cool, you know? And this is somebody who's teaching, you know, like these, you know, young people, right? And helping to shape their minds, like that bothered me. So initially I was like, oh, what am I, you know? So I didn't really speak up about it initially, maybe for like a week or two, but I did respond to her, and we ended up having this very lengthy, you know, email correspondence. And at some point, she said to me, she would say something, you know, I completely understand where you're coming from. You know, like things like where it sounds like a nice thing, but it's like, how can you completely
Mm-hmm.
understand? You know, it's like those kinds of things. Or she was, oh, but like I've seen Black people do this, or, you know, so she just had this sense of ownership,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that speaks to white supremacy, right? It's like this sense of like, I can do what I want with a Black body.
Mm.
You know, I have permission to do what I want with the Black body. And she also at one point in our correspondence said to me, you know, like you shouldn't be offended because I didn't intend it to be offensive, you know. And so this was yeah, this was really challenging. And then so I ended up, you know, speaking to a friend who's she's also a Black female who's a, you know, a college professor at a different school. And I you know, talked to her, and she really encouraged me to, you know, use the opportunity again, kind of going back to it, you know, saying my mom had taught me about creating value, or, you know, like creating poison, you know, making medicine from poison, right? So she was like, yeah, use this as a teachable, you know, teachable moment for your students.
Mm.
So without like, you know, getting like messy about it, right? So I was able to do that. And then I ended up in another moment of intuition, I, you know, so I had put off really addressing any, like my department head or, you know, any like other faculty or administration about it, even though it really offended me and bothered me. But then, you know, one day I was walking through the parking lot, and there was a white man who was walking near me. I was like, you know, just said hello. And then my inner voice said, Yuki, you need to talk to him. Like
Mm.
literally, my intuition was like, you need to talk to him about this. And my inner voice was like, watch where he's going to walk, where he goes, where his car is parked. So I stood in, you know, it probably looked creepy or whatever, but so I'm like standing there in the parking lot watching this man like walk to his car. and then and then sure enough, the parking space that he walked up to, it said vice president.
Mm.
He's the vice president of the school. So I was like, oh, okay, he's the person I'm supposed to talk to. So I was like, excuse me, you know. So I ended up telling him, and you know, and I, you know, had a conversation, you know, many conversations later, you know. But so yeah, I mean, you know, so that's just kind of one example of, it's kind of a layered situation, but just kind of every step of the way, kind of following my gut instinct of like, okay, this is something you need to speak up about and create value from it, you know, by then using it as a teaching point,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for other people, so that when they encounter that situation too, they'll be able to not feel that they're alone and that they have to make their voice heard. Because something my department had said at the time too is like, you know, she's probably felt comfortable to create that kind of art and even show it kind of in a very kind of brazen way, because no one, he was like, he said, I don't think anybody has ever really challenged her
Mm-hmm.
about it in a way that was sort of speaking from her kind of same like realm, you know, that
Mm.
she was working.
The entitlement to not ever being challenged and thinking things are okay and I can do whatever I want because I've never been challenged before, and then the immediate reaction upon being challenged is to challenge you back and to challenge your own
Right.
feelings, right? Like
Yeah.
that. Definitely there's so much happening in that example. I think like another key piece that you were talking about in that was, again, because of the majority white space too, of like representation and sort of like that, how much there is pressure to represent and to almost like in a sense like be the first,
Yeah.
right? How do you navigate finding space, like carving out space or getting into spaces that are of majority identities, and navigating that piece of making sure that you can do that work of carving out space for not just yourself but for others, when I think that there is that sense of almost like this, again, that expectation of like, well, we've given you this, so therefore it's almost like be grateful and then move on. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the challenges of gaining entry into majority spaces, and then the challenges once you are in those spaces as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would say the majority of my most recent experiences with any type of like work, whether, with work regard to like teaching specifically, especially, teaching in like, higher education, and also even with art, or, with poetry, right? With in publishing and so my most recent experiences is all or the opportunities I've been able to have are majority are through friendship.
Mm.
They're through friends. They are through. And what's interesting, and I attribute this to just like my, I don't know if you call it like fortune, or just kind of my, just the opportunity that I've had with developing friendships and having people advocate for me. That's kind of what happened recently, where I, obviously on my own, I'm doing the work, I'm applying to places or I'm submitting my work and whatnot. But the reality is my experience has been kind of going through the back door in terms of, through friends who are white, or if they're not white, they're not Black, or, if they're like, of like Latinx background, but, maybe they could maybe present as white, anyway, but a lot of it has been through friends who are white, who are already in those spaces. And it's almost like the visual I have, it's almost like you're trying to get into like a club and you can't like get into like the front door, like a dance club kind of club, what I mean? And then like somebody's like works at the club and is like holding the back door open and is like, all right, go, come on in this way. Like, it was very that, it's not illegal, like it's legal. I'm qualified, you know what I mean? So it's not, so on paper, I should be able to have the opportunity, but I honestly don't see any of those recent opportunities I've had that had I approached it through the front door end, I don't think I would have gotten in. I honestly don't. I truly believe that it was through these friendships with white people. Again, it's not like I was like intentionally trying to be friends with somebody who's in a space. They just happen to be my friends for real, or people who I've connected to, within the arts community. But yeah, they're taking it upon themselves to be an ally, or, to be an advocate and say, hey, I'm in this space and I have the opportunity to bring, this person into this space so they have a conversation, or, and then once I'm in that space, I think, again, for me, navigating it is just to really, along the way, like say what needs to be said. And then also just like focus on like doing a great job. So like, let's say if I had an opportunity to like recent, like right now I have opportunity where, I'm now included in a section of like creative loafing, like a local alternative weekly. And they have this little column called the Poet's Notebook, so I've recently been able to contribute also there, where there hasn't been a Black person, a Black woman, in that section. So even in there, or, so whether it's like with writing or teaching, it's just like, okay, when I get the opportunity, just like do my best work that I can, because I feel like that in itself is going to help open the door for people. And then once I'm in there, I make sure to use it as a platform. So for example, when I first started teaching at, or actually anywhere I would teach, but like especially when I first started teaching at Ringling, I remember, Brianna. I remember in developing a curriculum, right? Because I said that's educator. That's the T, right? That's the power you have. To you develop curriculum, right? So you have control. Maybe not completely, but you have some say in the content that you're going to present to your students. So I was very conscious with who I'm going to put in front of my students. So, for example, I remember for about first class, I was teaching first year writing, and so I was like, okay, like, so the example writers or the example artists I would pick, I would consciously choose people of color. I would consciously choose, so for my first class, I remember we were talking about, different, types of writing or, different ways of editing and stuff like that. And so we were talking about the art of rhetoric. And so with that, I showed this, like a video of like a Black, young man who's a writer, and, so just things like that, just like along the way, but at the time I wasn't like, hey, everyone, here's a Black man that you're going to watch now. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just kind of like, yeah, this is an example of excellent writing, and so just making it the norm.
I think like that gets to it, the making of the norm. And one thing that really stuck out about what you said earlier was, I don't think I would have made it in through the front door. And I think this sort of dichotomy, or this sort of like front door, back door piece of like, yes, it's great that through individual relationships and like our own excellence that, we can advocate for and bring folks in through the back door. And why did they have to go in through the back door? Like kind of going back to this piece of like, you've made it in, but then now, for example, when you're in a majority white institution, then you are now the only one, because you have been sort of brought in through the back door. You don't have other allies who share some identities to have your back. I really like the front door, back door analogy of like thinking about how do we change the systems that we have and the institutions that we have so that we are actually all coming in through the front door. Like we don't have to, we don't have to question ourselves and figure out how to make it in through some other way, or, find some other connections, that there is equity in that process. So moving in and kind of looking at the different intersections of identity, talking about karma, talking about like different concepts of bringing in faith into the conversation. Even within faith, like faith institutions are still institutions, right? They're still influenced by, they're embedded in that larger system and structure. I kind of want to get into a conversation around like your faith and both kind of like from that personal space of like, okay, how has your faith supported your own empowerment work, your own personal journey, but then also at the same time, from there, getting into what does that look like in terms of, even with those things that matter and mean so much to us and are so core to who we are, how do we navigate challenging those communities and institutions when we see them have a need for being challenged so that they can grow and do better by all of us?
For sure, yeah. I mean, for me, my experience, again, it comes through my mother. So, basically my mother, she's a practicing Buddhist, with Soka Gakkai International, SGI, Buddhist organization. It's a lay Buddhist organization based on the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin. And so, so I think I remember actually my very, very first experience was when I was in first grade, and my mom, I've been like going to some meetings with her, and we heard there's a chant, and the chant is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And so, I just kind of remember as a, little girl hearing that and being around it and stuff. I didn't really think anything too deeply of it at that point, and, like first grade era. But I remember, just like my very first experience with it was like, I was, there was like ironically, it was an Easter egg coloring contest. at school and in the first grade. And I remember I just really wanted to win the Easter egg coloring contest. So I was like, I remember seeing people do this chanting thing, and I'm just gonna chant and see to try to win. So I said the phrase "Nami Nikyo" 3 times, and then I began to do my best to color the best I could. And then I ended up winning first prize in the coloring Easter egg coloring contest from doing a Buddhist chant, which is so funny. Um, and so that, and then, but the key part of this experience was then I remember then going to a meeting after that, an SGI meeting, and then I remember the people there, they're all adults and I was the only kid in the room. But I remember mom prompted me again to like share my experience, what I went through. And I was like, well, this is what I did and this is what happened. But what I remember was the feeling. Like I have no memory of what the people said, right? But I just remember how they made me feel. And I remember they were like, yeah, like you did it. Like I just remember feeling really like validated and supported. And like I was like 5 or 6 years old, or it's maybe I was in the first grade, but I shared my voice. I shared what I went through, and then I immediately got validation that my voice and my experience is valued. And so that immediately taught me, that, okay, for one, this is a safe space to do that. And then two, it just made me want to, do that more. Right. And it helped other people to also feel that. And so, and then like when I was mentioning earlier about, the racism, the experiences with racism that I faced when I was a little girl. And so one story that my mom would taught me about is this parable called like the Dragon King's Daughter. It's like a Buddhist parable. It's basically this like, it's a parable about like this like 8-year-old girl who's also like half beast. She's half dragon and she lives at the bottom of the ocean. So basically, it's like she had to beat all the odds because prior to her appearance, in the Lotus Sutra, it's like you had to be a man, you had to be of a certain learned ability, kind of this, elite kind of intellectual ability and whatnot. And you have to like also get rid of all of like, kind of what people would call like your sins. Like you have to basically like be this perfect man in order to be an enlightened being. And so the parable goes of this Dragon King's daughter. So it's like she has all the marks against her of why she should not be enlightened. But then in front of everyone, in front of all the doubters and the naysayers, she stands up and she's like, just watch me, and then proceeds before their eyes to like, like kind of physically, right, like demonstrate, her ability to attain enlightenment. They're like, what? That's crazy, And so, she's just kind of like a mascot or like a representation of the kind of underdog or, kind of this idea of like, whatever you are, that again, that is deemed unworthy, you are actually very worthy, so, so it's just through stories like that. And then as I got older too, actually I remember also in middle school I had, gotten into some, kind of fights or issues with some of the other, students at the school who are actually like giving me a really hard time for being Buddhist, and they're basically bullying me for being Buddhist. This is in the States, and they're a Christian, they just, I'm not gonna say all Christians are like, they just so happen that they're Christian. But anyway, but that experience is also really valuable to me because then that made me want to study, because I remember at the time I wasn't able to really articulate why it is that I was a Buddhist. So I was like, I need to like find out more about this. So, I just started like studying like writings of, like Daisaku Ikeda and stuff like that. And then, eventually, as I've just kind of gone through my life, my kind of level of activity has like ebbed and flowed, in terms of my rootedness in the, in the practice or, together with the community. But, what I carry with me is that, the core principle, which is that, at the core, all life is worthy of respect. And also this idea that, you can create value, as you say, we can create value from anything, And so, it's been helpful to me to constantly, because this world is, this is hard to do this, and I feel like especially to work for social justice, just to be a functioning person, number one, that's not self-harming. I mean, that can be challenging, right? So, because I went through a period where I was even had brush with suicide or, stuff like that, or depression and anxiety, all these other things. And so I feel that, and then, compounded with maybe challenges that are going on externally with relationships or at the job place or societal issues or racial discrimination, all these things, it can be really tough. So for me, I continue to, do the daily chanting as a way for me to pull, just to connect with my core self, that's not bound by all of these things and the struggle and what's going on in society, and tapping into that core self that is courageous and has wisdom and compassion. I feel like that is what enables me to have the fuel to continue the work that's so hard to do. If because honestly, and even with doing it, some days you're I am over this, or I don't know if I can keep doing this, or what, screw the world, good luck world, good luck world, good luck with the whole making the world a better place thing, I'm out, but at the end of the day, I feel for me, the Buddhist practice, it also is rooted in having a sense of vow, having this sense of purpose, where it's okay, yeah, there's moments where it's tough to continue this work, but I have to keep going. This is why I was born. And so, just we kind of go to sleep at night, it's sometimes you get tired, you rest, that's, you need to rest sometimes, but then, life will always be there. And so you continue and, you contribute to the best of your ability, and and that's where I've also learned, the importance of, and the value of speaking up too. I feel that's been a lot of my training when I'm in these situations, in the, in work and stuff like that, of being able to have conversations, and bringing up things even when I was talking to that woman, right, who had said something that was offensive, but, for me, based on what I've, gleaned, through my Buddhist practice, that's been where I'm okay, I see what her behavior, right? I see the problem behavior. I'm calling her on it. But even as I was having all those interactions with her, I was focusing on her humanity. You know what I mean? I was focusing on because I believe that core is in there, that I have, that she has, that all living beings, all people have. And if I were to lose sight of that, then it's nothing more than tit for tat, and destruction on top of destruction. And so, obviously, even though there's some constructs that we have to break down, but that are, problematic, but I'm just really, yeah, just seeing it as a means for me to focus on my own inherent potential, positive potential, and the positive potential for other people. And sometimes that means calling them out or having an unpleasant and uncomfortable conversation, but still at the end of the day, not doing it from a place where it's because I want to dehumanize you and tear you down. Like, I'm
No,
doing
yeah,
this to help you
yeah.
too, you know, in
It's
the
for,
long
yes,
run.
for accountability. I feel like that piece of what you're saying of like, it's because you have that hope. It's because you have that, I recognize your humanity, and so that's why, because I care, I'm going to call you out. Which feels like it is very consistent with all the spaces that you occupy and that you find yourself in, that you are in those spaces because you love them, and at the same time you want to make them better for everybody and to make sure that it creates space for folks, for more folks. So with that, I want to make sure that folks get a chance to know, how can they hear more of you, how can they find you, where can they follow you and everything.
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Yuki Jackson Poet. And then also in my bio, there's a link to my website. It's yukijackson.com, YUKI Jackson.com. And so my website is like a good, I guess, like a one-stop shop for stuff, you know, related to like teaching and the battleground, and there's links to my poetry. And so right now I'm working on getting a manuscript published. So that's that'll be kind of like my next big project out. But yeah, for right now, just check out the website.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yuki. I really appreciate you taking the
Thank
time
you,
to do
Marcel.
this.
I appreciate you.